Well, kia ora koutou. Good afternoon from Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. I'm Murray Bruges. I'm the director of the Helen Foundation. Welcome to today's webinar, exploring how New Zealand could better safeguard future generations and the decisions that we're making today. Today's webinar will be hosted by one of the Foundation's new Honorary Senior Fellows, Professor Jonathan Boston of Victoria University. Our Honorary Fellows program brings together highly respected policy thinkers like Jonathan from across a range of disciplines to engage on some of the key long-term issues facing New Zealand, including via webinars like today's session and via op-eds and various print media. The program is designed to allow fellows to use the Helen Clark Foundation as a platform to contribute to the national conversation on issues that matter to New Zealand. If you're a member of our foundation, please know that you're directly supporting fellows like Jonathan and conversations like today's through your membership fees, and we really appreciate that support. If you're not a member but find sessions like these valuable, please consider becoming a member, which you can do at the link in the chat section at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Membership is currently only $65 and concession membership is $35, for instance, if you're retired or a student and would love to have you join us. As ever, we have an exciting range of webinars planned in the coming weeks, including one on junk food and obesity with Sir Ashley Bloomfield, among other experts, another on the various causes of online harm to young people, and another on New Zealand's relationship with the Pacific. So please keep an eye on your inbox for updates on those sessions. And as always, our customary reminder that this is a webinar, not a normal Zoom call. You are therefore very safe to eat your lunch and drink your coffee, safe in the knowledge that your cameras and microphones are off and no one can see you or hear you. We do hope you'll participate in the conversation, however. Best way to do that is by submitting your questions for today's panelists into the Q&A function, not the chat function, the Q&A function, also at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And our moderator for today, Jonathan, will put those questions to today's panel towards the end of the session. You'll also see there is a separate chat function. We'll put some links, but please put your questions in the Q&A area. So on to today's session. Our foundation is focused on developing solutions to New Zealand's key long-term challenges, issues like adapting to climate change, like maintaining and improving our social cohesion, and ensuring we have the right kinds of infrastructure in the right place. And one of the most important and powerful lenses when thinking about any long-term issue is through the lens of future generations. By definition, it's future generations of our country that will have to live with the consequences of the decisions that we're making today. Yet their interests do not always feature highly in the public or the political debate about the key decisions that we're making today. So we were really thrilled when Jonathan suggested a webinar on this topic, and even more thrilled with the caliber of panelists he's brought to the discussion. So with that, Jonathan, thank you for convening today's discussion, and over to you.
Well, thank you, Murray, and greetings, everybody. Welcome to this webinar on safeguarding the future, delivering on the recent United Nations Declaration on Future Generations. Before introducing the three contributors, could I just emphasize that the issues around safeguarding the future are obviously of vital importance and of an enduring nature and require ongoing attention. And accordingly, the Helen Clark Foundation will be planning future webinars on such matters over the coming years. And the intention is to draw on a wide range of voices and perspectives, including obviously those of Māori and Pacifica, along with a range of experts from different disciplines. So with respect to the three contributors, thank you all for joining us. First of all, we have Jack Ellis from Wales. Jack is the co-lead and founder of what is called the Impact Coalition for Future Generations. And he's also the Director for External Relations and Culture in the Office of the Future Generations Commissioner of Wales, an office that was established almost a decade ago. Jack has been involved heavily in the development of the United Nations Declaration on Future Generations and the related Pact for the Future. So Jack will speak initially for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have two responses, one from Simon Upton, who I'm sure will be known to everyone online. Simon is the current Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, a distinguished parliamentarian by way of background, and also someone who has served in various roles as an international public servant. He's made a huge contribution to policymaking, both locally and internationally. So welcome, Simon. And Simon will be followed by Sophie Hanford. Sophie is just concluding her second term as a councillor for the Kapiti Coast District Council. She founded, among other things, the Strike for Climate some years ago, pre-COVID, and has been heavily involved in a range of issues, including the work of the Wellbeing Alliance and the production of a recent discussion document called Tomorrow Together. And Sophie will almost certainly say something about that later in this webinar. So welcome, Sophie. So without any more ado, we'll turn it over to you, Jack. And Jack has got some slides and which he will speak to. And after the presentation and the two responses, we'll have a little bit of interaction among the three contributors and then open it up for questions. Thank you, Jack.
Perfect. Thank you, Jonathan. Kia ora, prynhawn da to you all. Good afternoon. Gai ddiolch i chi am y croeso cynnes i fod yma gyda chi heddiw yn eich cwmni. Ac fy mod ymhell o gyffiniau a thirlun Cymru, rwy'n teimlo'n gartrefol yng nghanol prydferthwch a cilioni a'r Tyroa. A wirddwn ni mynyddoedd Cymru ac cyfonydd fy mrod, dwi'n dod â chyfeillgarwch a diolch gan fy mhobol. So my country's English name, Wales, finds its origins in the word meaning foreigner or outsider. But our Welsh name, Cymru, comes from something far truer to our nature, Togetherland, the place where we work together to meet challenges and where everyone has a home. In that same spirit, I'm deeply honoured to be with you today in the hope that together we can make a difference. I've chosen this picture not only because I promised my twin brother that I would take him to New Zealand, so I'm cheating slightly here, but I'd also like to encourage you to invoke your inner child, that part of you when you were younger or a lot younger that made you dream, imagine, play, be creative, and forgive me for sharing some examples from your neighbours in Australia, but these photos were taken when I visited last year and put a smile on my face. That question, what do you want to be when you're older, allowed you to imagine a future with endless possibilities. We tend to forget that we were once a lot more curious about the unknown. I particularly like this one. In the future, I want to be a cake, and we will not stand in that child's way of their ambitions there. Well, can I take the opportunity to thank the Helen Clark Foundation and partners here in New Zealand for their continued efforts in convening and their advocacy for the open discussions of such topics and for the opportunity to address you all today. Though this is my first visit to New Zealand, it already feels very much like home. Our nations are bound by a deep connection to nature and land and a shared respect for the rural communities that sustain us. Both our countries recognise the vital role our communities play in protecting heritage while leading a just transition towards more sustainable land use and food systems. And of course, we both occupy that special space among the world's smaller nations with global outlooks and big ambitions. Sometimes we also make our larger neighbours a little nervous on and off the rugby field. And as a proud Welshman, it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge our shared passion for that beautiful game. But as a former rugby referee, I must remain neutral, which means I won't say a word about that recent historical defeat to South Africa. And while you might mistake Wales's recent run of defeats for their lack of form, I prefer to think of it as careful preparation, as we'll have our chance to set things right on the 23rd of November when we welcome the All Blacks to our capital city. It is often quite amusing for me when speaking in events about the long term that I take the opportunity to reflect on the past. So a quick Google search last night, in all efforts to find a serious and poignant historical New Zealand moment, I landed on the fact that on this day, in 1967, New Zealand pubs officially changed from a 6 p.m. closing time to 10 p.m., ending 50 years of the earlier closing rule, showing that even small shifts in rules can give society a little extra room to think, plan, and prepare for the future. Well, today I want to talk about the F word and call on us to embrace it as part of our work. I want to hear the F word shouted in meetings. I want journalists to use it more. I want academics to say it. And I want us to celebrate the word and congratulate our children for using it too. Of course, I'm talking about futures. I'm here today to provide a provocation of the actions we need to take globally to ensure we take better account of future generations in our decisions. And I know it's hard. As someone who has worked in this policy space for over 8 years, and I'm sure those who worked in it for longer would agree, we know that thinking beyond the month, the year, the electoral cycle can be difficult. As a former journalist, I know too well the daily news cycle dominates narratives, and our fixation with instant gratification forces us to live in the age of the polycrastination. That's not my problem, or I'll deal with that tomorrow. And as Jean-Claude Juncker, the former president of the European Commission, famously said, we all know what to do, but we don't know how to get re-elected once we've done it. But in fact, we're storing problems up daily for future generations, like a giant bag of toxic waste, and dumping it in the future. I'm honoured to represent today the Impact Coalition for Future Generations, a growing global network with over 500 members committed to championing the rights of future generations and mobilising long-term action to support the Declaration on Future Generations. Our coalition was born from a shared recognition that short-termism in global and national governance perpetuates inequality and insecurity. To counter this, we bring together government, civil society, academia, and youth to foster intergenerational equity, solidarity, and practical solutions. We are, above all, a community of civil society, ready both to champion and to challenge the actions of the UN and member states as we collectively strive to deliver on the promise of the Declaration for Future Generations. For me, this subject of long-term thinking is personal for two reasons. I'd like to take you to 1966. It's a Friday afternoon in October, and a mere 24 hours later, the children at this South Wales community of Aberfan would have found themselves at the start of their school holidays. 144 people were killed that morning, 116 of them children, as the coal slurry engulfed the school shortly after morning assembly. This is a story of failure to take action for the long term. It's a story of our lack of foresight, of taking actions. It's also a story much like the one communities across the world face, some equally as tragic, and others that draw on similar themes of neglect, ignorance, and short-termism. The second story I would like to briefly share is the one of the Welsh Women's Peace Petition of 1924. At a time when the world was mourning in the aftermath of the First World War, a group of ordinary Welsh women collected 390,000 signatures demanding global change. The petition was handed to the US president with a simple call for global peace and to challenge his country to join the then League of Nations. These women weren't policymakers, they weren't famous, they certainly didn't hold power. They were citizens who thought not only about the world they lived in, but about the world their children and grandchildren would inherit. This story is remarkable because, remember, we're only a population of 3 million. And of course, at this time, women didn't have full voting rights. The words of the petition on the left are simple. The future is big with hope if we as the women of this generation do our part. To us has come an opportunity as real as the responsibility is grave. We would therefore appeal to you, women of the United States of America, to aid in the effort to hand down to the generations which come after us the proud heritage of a warless world. These words are important. Handing down to generations which come after us is a clear nod to future generations. Then it is deeply moving that these words are then echoed in the opening line of the UN Charter. We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. Perhaps, and I suggest only to indulge, that perhaps Wales played its part in this wording. The story is personal to me because the petition is now being digitized. 100 years later, the petition has been moved from the Smithsonian Museum in Washington to rural Aberystwyth in mid-Wales, where at our National Library the names are being inputted into the database, enabling generations alive today to identify family members or former tenants in their homes. When I searched for a family connection, at this stage a word-by-word, line-by-line manual exercise, I was about to give up until my 92-year-old grandmother leaned over my shoulder and spotted a name: Frederick Arthur Fox, my great-great-grandfather, one of only a handful of men who signed the petition. I like to think that makes him both a feminist and a futurist, a man who believed in peace, progress, and the power of people to change the world. It is more so ironic, or perhaps convenient, that I too found myself 100 years later at the Summit of the Future, as part of the UK government's delegation with a similar message in the US for the world, for us to take action for future generations. I'm not sure my great-great-grandfather ever imagined that his great-great-grandson would find himself in the US, or indeed had ever dreamt of the United Nations and the multilateral ecosystem. And while I know very little about the man, I have through this moment a deep sense of intergenerational solidarity to current, past, and future generations, and to only dream about what my great-great-grandson will be doing in 100 years' time. I should take this opportunity, and I encourage you to do the same, to reflect on the actions your ancestors took to make the world a better place. They are not just numbers in a census, they are as active now in you as they were when they were born. So I thank Beryl, David, Ellis, Len, my grandparents, with whom I express my gratitude for who I am today and for the world I inherited. And I think today particularly of my grandfather, who died 17 years ago yesterday. I share this story of the Welsh Women's Peace Petition because it's incumbent on all of us to find our why we care, why we do what we do, how our values show up in our work and our lives. It's also a real story about civic society, of community, of movements. In January 2022, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres spoke about the breakdown of our global systems, frameworks that had once been trusted to protect our climate, ecosystems, and shared prosperity, and warned that they were no longer fit for purpose. Helen Clark herself has noted that in an age of turmoil, decision makers need to address complex and interlinked challenges, and citizens need the skills to operate within that world. Guterres issued an ultimatum: to break down or to break through. It was a stark choice, and out of that moment came something remarkable: our common agenda, the Secretary General's call for action. That report led in 2024 to the UN hosting its Summit of the Future, and by unanimous vote, a Pact for the Future and its annexed UN Declaration on Future Generations and Digital Compact were adopted. This Summit of the Future represented one of the most important shifts in the global governance since the founding of the United Nations itself, that I'm certain. Its sister conference a year previously, the SDG Summit, showed a concerning slowdown in progress, with only 35% of SDG targets on track, nearly half moving too slowly, and 18% reversing. New thinking, new ideas, and bolder decision-making is now necessary. But what is the Declaration on Future Generations? Well, central to the Declaration is the importance of recognizing that our actions and inactions affect future generations. Therefore, world leaders realize that present generations have a responsibility to act with the needs and interests of future generations in mind. The Declaration includes 11 actions that will help us to institutionalize and monitor what we're doing to safeguard the needs and interests of those not yet born. These include leveraging science and strategic foresight, moving towards long-term thinking and planning, and encouraging evidence-based decision-making, with the hope of establishment of a UN Special Envoy for future generations. Of the actions, I draw your attention to this one in particular. Member states to undertake a whole-of-government approach to coordination, including at the national and local levels, on the assessment, development, implementation, and evaluation of policies that safeguard the needs and interests of future generations. That means you have a political mandate, a public commitment on the global stage. So what of New Zealand? Well, here in Aotearoa, one can argue that long-term thinking is part of the national DNA. It's written into Maori teaching, the understanding that everything is connected. It's woven through tikanga, honouring the past, cherishing the present, safeguarding the future. In more recent times, we've seen governments of all colours here in New Zealand approach long-term governance in different ways. One of New Zealand's earliest institutional commitments to long-term thinking came with the establishment of the Commission for the Future in 1977, though this work disbanded in the early 1980s. It was said by the McGuinness Institute in 2011 that New Zealand's future thinking landscape has been defined by ad hoc initiatives that have attempted to fill the void created by the lack of long-term planning within the government framework. I beg to ask the question, how true is that statement today? And what about political parties? Well, it would seem I have too much time on my hands, as last night I decided to count how many times political parties here in New Zealand used the word futures in recent publications. The National Party's 100-day action plan doesn't mention futures once, while their manifesto for 2023 mentions futures 12 times. The Labour Party uses it 42 times, the Green Party's manifesto 13 times, Te Pāti Māori Party twice. Well, what does this signal? A mundane game that I played, a Control F to find some words, perhaps? Or the cynic in me expresses that our political parties must go further to engage with and understand its relationship with the future. The word future matters. We must use it or lose it. I caveat and happy to be corrected on my analysis, and of course other parties are available. But I'm pretty confident that my quick desktop research isn't too far from the truth. But there is hope. Initiatives like the Tomorrow Together campaign have sought to breathe new life into this desperately needed discourse, encouraging communities, local governments and national institutions to ask, how do our choices today shape the world for our grandchildren and generations to come? 10 years ago, Wales passed the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, a world-first law that puts the needs of future generations at the heart of public life. It requires every public body, from local councils to health boards, to make decisions that improve well-being for both current and future citizens, acting in a manner which seeks to ensure that the needs of the present are met without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. It's built around 7 well-being goals: a prosperous, resilient, healthier and more equal Wales, a Wales of cohesive communities, vibrant culture and thriving Welsh language, and a globally responsible Wales. It challenges how we plan, how we spend, and how we define success. Changing mindsets, of course, takes time, but it's happening. We're seeing preventative investment, innovation and collaboration, and crucially, the Act established a Future Generations Commissioner, an independent guardian who ensures long-term thinking stays on the agenda. Already, we've seen countries and institutions around the world taking action. And I stress that Wales's model is but one model. From an EU Intergenerational Fairness Commissioner, a Scottish and Australian campaign brewing, and government ministerial departments across the world, notably in Nigeria, who have taken proactive steps to build anticipatory governance into their delivery. You can start small. Polling that we all, Aotearoa, commissioned in 2024 through Talbot Mills found that 76% of people agree that the interests of future generations should be a priority when making decisions on important policies in the present day. That is your permission, your invitation to not only meet the minimum expectations of the Declaration on Future Generations, but to exceed them, designing your own solutions, carving out new opportunities, taking the decision to be leaders in this space. I'm fully aware that I'm coming to the end of my time, by the way. Real change happens not in the statute books, but in the conversations people have in offices, council chambers, classrooms, and communities. How we challenge and stretch, how we compromise, how we choose to make difficult decisions, driven by our values and mindsets. That key question, what will this mean for future generations, is a question too often missing from the policy debate. It's actually a question that I invite you to ask in your workplaces of all kind. Where you procure, how you travel, who you buy from, do you need to buy at all, who you speak to and who you invite to speak. Because embedding the interest of future generations isn't only a technical exercise, it's a human one. It's about values, courage and imagination. With New Zealand's examples of long-term governance and culture, it now falls on you to answer what next, what now, what does New Zealand want its leadership role to be? And that isn't for me to design. What does this number invoke in you? Well, what do you think it represents? It reflects the projected population change here in New Zealand from 2023 to 2053. These are your future generations. Your children, great-grandchildren, and the 200 babies born globally every minute are your responsibility too. In fact, during this intervention, 4,000 babies have been born. And rather fittingly, today is also World Post Day. So I encourage you to metaphorically send a postcard to those children in the future. Perhaps you will paint a picture of the actions you took in 2025 for a better future. Deciding to be good citizens is a choice. You also have the moral responsibility to be good ancestors. I get to hold my hand up and say that my great-great-grandfather was a good ancestor. You get to decide whether or not you want to join him. When I first learned the word Kaitiakitanga, forgive me for mispronunciation, that word to me felt familiar. Different language, same truth. We are part of something bigger than ourselves. Sometimes I feel a bit like Doctor Who, living partly in the future while trying to convince decision makers in the present to make better choices. There's one thing I truly envy about the fictional time traveler, his ability to jump through time without getting jet lag. So in thanking you for your time, I hope through a slightly sleep-deprived haze, I have managed to offer you both coherence and provocation today. Kia kaha, diolch yn fawr, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jack. That was a very provocative, challenging presentation, and the challenge for us all to think about how we can be good ancestors. You talked about values, courage, and imagination. And I now turn to Simon Upton, who has indeed demonstrated a commitment to values, courage, and imagination in his many roles. So Simon, some responses from you would be very welcome. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Jonathan, and mihi nui, Jacob. I've been watching the chat comments coming up. Another one inspiring. Thank you, Jacob. Excellent. Thank you, Jacob. Impressive and challenging. So you've certainly struck a chord with your audience. I was going to say thank you for being relentlessly positive and a relentlessly positive advocate for future generations. I just want to get the positive out of the road at the beginning, because I actually, without wishing to be a wet blanket, just want to ask you some questions and try to focus some of our thinking on how we survive the present. You said that the future was woven into the DNA of Wales and Aotearoa. Well, it may be woven into the DNA of Wales. I'm not sure I could say that. I'm really sorry there isn't a tangata whenua perspective here. There's a whakatoki about going into the past with our eyes fixed firmly in the past and our ancestors. But I'm not Māori. I'm part of a colonial descendancy. I can't say that I have good ancestors necessarily. I can see good and I can see bad in them. But I was interested in the petition, the 1924 petition from the women to the US president. If my history is correct, that was the presidency of Warren Harding. It was the Teapot Dome scandals days. I'm not sure what sort of ground, fertile or otherwise, it fell on. But of course, peace didn't occur. The world descended into war. And then we thought we'd learnt from all of that again in the aftermath of that. And you'd have to say that it's not looking safe for peace in our times at the present. You said we need new thinking, new ideas, and bold decision making. And I'd put back to you that yes, of course we need that, but saying it doesn't make it happen. And I was really, this is the principal thing I'd like to ask you is, what's the survivability of the office of the Commissioner for Future Generations? I ask that very seriously because I looked at your legislation, which is very much driven off sustainable development, and it's very fulsome and expansive. I compare it with my own, and I have a much more modest, much smaller brief, which is just really the environment. It was created in 1989, so it's actually survived, 3.5 decades. And one of the reasons I think my office has survived so far is that I think Sir Geoffrey Palmer, who was the architect of all of the environmental reforms of the era, of which I was part myself as a young MP, but I think Sir Geoffrey Palmer really understood something very important, and that is in democratically accountable regimes, you have to think hard about how you make law durable. And when I look at my functions under Section 16 of the Act, there is only one normative word in it. Everything is process. The only normative words I can find is that in doing what I have to do under my functions, I have to do so with the objective of maintaining and improving the quality of the environment. So there is, he just tipped the cap to the fact that, we do need to improve. So that's the only forward-looking word in the entire Section 16. No, I assure you, I spend more time thinking about the future than one word out of about 300 would suggest. But I can say to parliamentarians, and I work for all of them, regardless of party, listen, you'll all have different views about the future and about the environment, but I can't come along and give you advice about how you can let things go to the dogs, because my statute says that I have to work on the basis that we want to maintain or improve the quality of the environment. So that's my baseline. But to be concerned about the environment isn't enough. You actually have to be prepared to act. And as you said, bold decision making, that takes courage and will frequently involve telling people that you can't have the best of all worlds. And thinking of future generations, that what you consume irrevocably today won't be there for our children. Those are difficult messages. And if you are even vaguely objective about what we read literally in real time, coming in from around the world as to where the political debate has moved, I don't detect a bold future-looking world. I actually checked out your country, and I note that Plaid Cymru is polling 30% and Nigel Farage's Reform Party 29%. Now, I don't know. I haven't literally gone beyond that. I don't know whether Mr. Farage has checked out the future generations. Yes, he'd keep that going, that whatever subsidiarity there is between Westminster and Cardiff would be maintained. But you know, that's the world that you're living in, and you're part of a country which used to be part of the EU. Look at what's happening there. So I just think we need to think hard about institutional longevity. Your section 2 of your act says that sustainable development means the process of improving the economic, social, environment, and cultural well-being, ... Process. I think it's quite cunning, saying, look, it's actually a process rather than a thing. So it's not, but it's not very advocacy-ish, is it? A process. That's quite cunning to say it's a process. But how do you maintain that process over time? Because as you point out, there was a Commission for the Future in New Zealand. That's been abolished. There was a Commissioner for the Environment in Ontario. She got abolished. She came on a trip just before she got abolished, and we had a very pleasant conversation here in Wellington. Your office that you work for, mine, can be abolished just by an act of Parliament. It's as simple as that. So I'm really interested, Jacob, to know why Wales is immune from the tides of the world, why it will remain immune of them, because you're, I think you're the best place to tell us that. I'll just finish with this point. Why is the future so tricky for us? And I think it's got something to do with imagination, lacking the imagination to understand what we're doing to the planet, lacking the imagination to put ourselves in the shoes of not just future generations, but the life of this planet. And I'll finish by recommending a book. I'm currently reading Cry of the Wild by Charles Foster, who is a fellow at Exeter College, Oxford. He's the most remarkable writer, but he's put himself inside the minds of animals in the UK and talked about what's happening to them as creatures of this world, but encountering the roadblocks and the toxins, the pathogens, the noise we throw at them. It is a feat of imagination, and I think it probably has a better chance of causing someone to stop and think than me advocating a new regulatory regime which has all the right words in it and says things that must happen. So I'm grappling really with this issue. New Zealand's really good at law. It's really good at policy. It's really good at policy process. We have excellent people like Jonathan, who, if you say the wrong thing, they'll be onto you in a moment. And they can, you know, it's actually a very high quality policy debate often here, but what happens in our society is another matter. So I don't look to acts of Parliament to promote the values that you are advocating for. And somebody's asking what the book is. It's Cry of the Wild by Charles Foster. So, Jonathan, I hope that's helpful.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Simon. You posed some very telling questions to Jack. But before I let Jack respond, we'll go to Sophie. And then, Jack, please, you'll have the opportunity to respond to Simon's comments and questions and those of Sophie. Off you go, Sophie. And unmute. Yes, thank you.
Kia ora. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, Jack, and thanks, Simon. Ngā mihi nui ki a koe, Jack, for your inspiring kōrero, as has been mentioned multiple times in the chat, and also for your global leadership in this movement for intergenerational justice. It's a real privilege to share this virtual space with you and to connect what's happening internationally to what's growing here in Aotearoa, New Zealand as well. And to Simon's point, I'll also recommend a book which evokes a similar type of imagination that I got from my dad for Father's Day. It's called The Nation of Plants, and it's a manifesto written on behalf of the plant world, essentially to the UN. So it's really beautiful. It's by, let's see, Stefano Mancuso, and I can pop it in the chat as well. But to respond. Right now, the stakes have never been higher. New Zealand's oceans are warming 34% faster than the global average, threatening coastal communities, ecosystems, and industries. That also means that 2/3 of New Zealanders are living in areas prone to flooding and rising sea levels. During the 2022 and 23 season, over 80% of monitored river swimming sites were unsafe to swim in at least one occasion. If we look at the social dynamic, mental health challenges are rising, with roughly 1 in 4 young people experiencing symptoms of anxiety. The wealth gap continues to widen in our country, with the top 10% of households in Aotearoa, New Zealand, holding more than half the nation's total wealth. Now, when the United Nations adopted the Declaration on Future Generations last year that Jack spoke of, it felt like a moment of possibility, a turning point in how we as a global community think about our shared responsibility and act into that sense of responsibility. It also felt like an invitation to ask, how do we bring that commitment home? How do we make sure New Zealand's story is one of courage, care, and long-term thinking? Because this isn't new to us as a country. The idea of making decisions with the well-being of those yet to come has always been embedded in Te Ao Māori. And I too, Simon, have kind of noticed the missing perspective of someone who can speak with that lived experience as well. If we look at whakapapa, the concept of whakapapa, and kaitiakitanga, the understanding that we are part of a long line of ancestors and descendants bound together across time. Now, that's what Tomorrow Together is all about, and I promised Jonathan I would wave this around. It's a national campaign that we've launched through the Wellbeing Economy Alliance Aotearoa, or We All Aotearoa, where I have the huge privilege of working a couple of days a week. It's essentially an invitation to all of us in Aotearoa, New Zealand, across politics, all sides of the so-called political divide, into the private sector, communities, and everyday life, to think and act as good ancestors. To ask not just what will this achieve by the next election, but what will this mean for our mokopuna and for their mokopuna. So we've started bringing people together around that question through the Tomorrow Together discussion document, through conversations in Parliament, through conversations out in communities, workshops alongside young people. We've got a youth leadership group really supercharging and steering this campaign, through policy thinkers bringing their thoughts and expertise to the table, and dreaming alongside leaders from all different corners of the motu who have all different types of experiences and expertise to bring to the table. Now, what struck me most is how much common ground there already is around this need to think about our kids and our grandkids. At our launch at Parliament, we had 15 members of Parliament from across the House, including members from the ACT Party, Te Pāti Māori, the Green Party, Labour, National, and unfortunately our New Zealand First attendee was unable to be present with us. But again, there was interest from every single political party within our Parliament. We also had former Prime Ministers Sir Geoffrey Palmer and the Right Honourable Jim Bolger standing side by side to say this kaupapa is bigger than politics. It's about who we are and what we're leaving behind. I feel so strongly that that's something uniquely powerful about Aotearoa. When we choose to, we can come together around shared values of care, fairness, and responsibility. It's the same spirit that made us the first country to give women the vote, the same spirit that allowed us to take a stand for a nuclear-free Pacific. And it's the same courage that we need right now to look beyond short-term cycles and choose a future that's thriving, connected, and fair. Now, Tomorrow Together isn't just about policy change, to Simon's point. It's about a cultural shift, a mindset shift. It's about building a future economy that measures success not by how fast we grow, but by how well we live, where progress is about thriving ecosystems, healthy communities, and time to care for one another, where we honour the wisdom of Te Ao Māori, the creativity of our rangatahi, the knowledge of our communities, all as essential parts of decision making. Now, the good news is that the seeds of this future are already here. They're in local councils doing really awesome mahi on climate through planning and strategic frameworks. They're in iwi-led initiatives restoring whenua and waterways, and in young leaders starting social enterprises that again put purpose before profit. And they're in conversations like this where we can learn from global examples too. So what Tomorrow Together seeks to offer is a place for all of those efforts to connect and for us to forge a pathway to make it real. So the invitation and the widow, the challenge, if we truly believe in being good ancestors, let's find ways to show it in our policies, in our budgets, in our communities. Let's design decision-making systems that think as far ahead as our hearts already do and already feel. So you can add your voice to this kaupapa through our discussion document, which you can find on the Wellbeing Economy Alliance website, but I can also pop a link in the chat for you as well. We've got 9 key questions helping to kind of ground this conversation, and we'd love to hear your thoughts, your visions, your ideas. And then early next year, we will be putting out a synthesis report on what we hear back through this conversation and trying to use it as a circuit breaker in next year's central government election to, again, foster a cross-party sense of what's possible when we put future generations at the heart of decision making. You can also sign on to our Tomorrow Together Charter alongside amazing partner organisations like UNICEF, Oxfam, B-Lab Aotearoa, Lawyers for Climate Action, maybe the Helen Clark Foundation, if that's a conversation we're keen to have. But together we can make intergenerational fairness not just a vision, but a foundation of how Aotearoa works. And we invite you all through the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, Aotearoa and Tomorrow Together to be a part of this mahi. So thank you, Jack, for your inspiration. Thank you, Simon, for your mātauranga and your wisdom. I'm really grateful to be here.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Thank you for your hard work in this policy space and the enthusiasm that you have brought to that. And thank you for your challenge to people on this webinar to contribute to that endeavour. Jack, I think it would be a good opportunity just to give you a chance to respond to particularly what Simon said and the challenges he posed, but also any comments on the work that Sophie referred to. So over to you, Jack.
I'll start there in saying that I travel across the world and engage with countries regularly on supporting them to think in this space, and I will leave New Zealand in full admiration at what's happening here, and with the energy that Sophie and the team is bringing to this agenda, I have no worries that something good will come from this. It's such a powerful vision. You know, it is a common sense approach. When we talk about our children and our grandchildren, we want the best for them. No one can disagree with that, but it will require cross-sectoral, cross-government, cross-parliament thinking and to come together across communities. And we will, to bridge to Simon's points, and there were several of them, and I welcome them all, Simon, and maybe we won't be able to cover them all in detail today, but I'll be very keen to continue the conversations. We will require us globally to use different language for different audiences and different political beliefs. When I say future generations, another party or another political belief might say duty of care, might be better to talk about long-term governance. We might need to talk about strategic foresight. Ultimately, we're aiming to achieve the same outcome, but it does require us to maybe start from a different position with different political affiliations and beliefs. I do think that it's important for me to illustrate, and many on the call will be familiar with the fact that Welsh politics is unique. It is different to a lot of different parts of the world. We've had the same political party in government since devolution. So that's for 25 years. The same party that introduced the legislation in 2015 is the same party that is there now. Simon has indicated that that is likely, under polling, to change next year. All I will say is that there are local government parties or parties in charge of local governments across Wales of different political affiliations that are not Labour run. And there is cross-party support for the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, again, because you cannot disagree with the People's Act. Not many pieces of legislation started with the fact that it was the people of Wales through the national conversation in 2014 that went on to design the legislation. It is a reminder that we have a pledge, a promise to the people of Wales to deliver on their aspirations. You most definitely get a sense from me during the 20 minutes that I'm a glass half full rather than a glass half empty person. I do think that the winds of change are moving in the right direction, particularly as the declaration has been signed up to by 193 countries. It means New Zealand has committed on the global stage to doing this. So it must now domestically consider how it's going to meet, particularly that action that I referred to earlier. A commissioner term is 7 years. It therefore straddles or bridges two parliamentary cycles. And that helps, I think, to in that space. And the final thing I will say is Wales has always had a proud sustainable development story. It has now, however, moved from a duty to promote sustainable development to a duty to deliver sustainable development, and that's what the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act seeks to do. There are many other things. We don't yet have any kind of legislative or framework for giving nature a voice. However, each of our parliamentarians have been given a species that is facing extinction and regularly voice that species needs on the floor of the chamber. And that's one method in ensuring that nature has a voice in politics or in decision making. But there are many other models to explore, including the Oxford example.
Well, thank you very much, Simon. I'm conscious there's many comments and quite a few questions in the Q&A. So just selectively addressing some of those questions. One asks the question, Jacob, about the relationship between the SDGs and the UN Declaration for Future Generations. I wonder if you could quickly say something about that particular connectivity. Yeah. And Simon and Sophie, if you want to comment on that as well, that's fine.
It's really, so the first thing I'll say is that our piece of legislation was being developed in parallel to the Sustainable Development Goals, which were being designed in the background. Our piece of legislation passed 3 months before the SDGs did, then in September of that year. And the intention was that every country identified ways to be able to translate or localize the SDGs domestically. Now, we haven't seen that happen across the world. Wales is still the only country to legislate on the basis of the SDGs. You'll see the reference to the SDGs in our legislation, and the SDGs remain a voluntary exercise at the global level. The SDGs are a paramount of importance to be delivered. We are not on track to deliver them, and there are arguments that it's because we are not thinking long-term enough, that we are not providing enough of a lens on long-term thinking within approaching the SDGs. So the SDGs are not forgotten. They are still important to be delivered. The Declaration on Future Generations allows us to consider the methods, if you like, to how we go about achieving the SDGs. But no, an important process. And what will happen, of course, after 2030, when the SDGs technically come to an end, is there are ongoing conversations now about what comes afterwards. And the Impact Coalition is of the belief that Agenda 2100 needs to be the consideration. How do we push that horizon further? But most definitely, the SDGs are still important, and they work in parallel with the Pact for the Future and the Declaration.
Thanks, Jack. Simon, Sophie, did you want to comment on that at all? No. Okay. There's a range of questions. Some of them are directed at Simon and Sophie. One general question here is around education and kind of the thinking that needs to be done right through our education system and beyond in kind of changing attitudes and perspectives and perhaps enhancing our imagination, to use that word that both Jack and Simon referred to a number of times. So I just wondered if any of you would just like to comment on the contribution to thinking about the future via our education system, and how well are we doing? How could we improve? Any comments on that? Simon?
I'll be honest, Jonathan, I haven't given thought to that. I suspect Sophie may have, though, in the context of together tomorrow, tomorrow together.
Sophie?
Yeah, sure. I think just considering kind of the ways in which we're asking questions to provoke the right kind of thinking that's going to be helpful and kind of getting us out of this pathway always towards this future that we're kind of assuming we have to inherit, but I think we get the politics we think we deserve. And so if we can imagine something better and are asking the right questions of each other to help get us in that direction, we know we can't use the same tools that or look on the same what we might have thought were solutions that have caused the climate crisis and various other issues that are also interconnected. We cannot use those same levers to get us out. So it is going to require a different way of thinking and a different way of operating. And I think a lot of that also comes down to the willingness to collaborate. I think if we are to kind of properly educate in a way that is integrated across all levels of the public sector, across all levels of society, that's going to require kind of being really humble about this conversation and just collaborating in all the ways that we can to get the word out as far and wide as we possibly can as well. And I think the beautiful thing that we've so far found with the Tomorrow Together campaign is that empowering young people to be change agents and to lead it has been really beautiful because, yeah, again, like I think they're able to somewhat speak truth to power in a way that people in maybe roles like yours, Simon, it's harder to be able to do. So that kind of completely like unconstrained view of the world and just being able to jump on in boots and all and say loud and proud what needs to happen for Te Taio and our people.
Thanks, Sophie. Jack, did you want to say anything about the situation in Wales with respect to perhaps the role of your office in cultivating a perspective on the future in the education system?
Yeah, so I think that two things. Is the education system fit for the future? Is a question that we should be asking. Is the way that we teach our children and our pupils the right methods and the right approaches to combat the challenges and ensure that they have the right skills for the future? I referenced Helen Clark's quote earlier about equipping citizens with the right skills. So that's a question, how we measure, how we, the qualifications, etc., all that kind of questions, and how much emphasis we put on vocational skills needs to be thought through. As well as then the content of what is being discussed. The Wales has a new curriculum. We've put climate change and racial injustice at the heart of the curriculum. We have an emphasis on being creative and curious citizens and global citizens of the world. So I think there are opportunities for us to look again at the content that we are doing, how we apply futures literacy as a skill, and finally, this needs to be a lifelong education story? How do we ensure that we continue to learn into our older age, and how we continue to learn through work in order for us to get better, fair pay and fair jobs, and better upskilled jobs, particularly in the green economy as well. So there are constant questions within education that must be considered: the what it looks like, but also how it's delivered.
Thanks, Jack. Simon, a specific question for you. It relates to the work you've been doing on the decline in urban green spaces in the last 4 decades or so. And the question is, I wonder if you think we can address how we can address this, and what it means for our climate if we fail to act. Do you want to quickly comment on that?
It's a remarkably specific
it is
query, but it's a fascinating one. I didn't know anything about it before we did the research on it. I just had this suspicion that things were getting harder, less permeable, and fewer trees, and likely to get hotter, and if we're going to densify everything, it was going to get worse. So we actually did some empirical work to prove that point, using machine learning on aerial photographs at different time periods. Extremely interesting piece of work. So we put the facts there in front of people. But I come back to this point. You put the facts in front of ministers. You put the facts in front of people. Okay, that's terrifically interesting. Yes, thank you. We'll think about that. Somebody has to actually get them to act. And I think that we try to do so much in this country, top down from the centre. It's actually at the place that people have the greatest sense of investment in it. Now, they won't necessarily agree, but I think we've got to do a much better job of engaging people. I come from near Hamilton. Around Hamilton, every clay hill is being bulldozed flat so that it can take concrete pad foundations. So all gradient, all contour goes, all topsoil goes, the whole thing is compacted. It will never grow trees, and you'll have to have bigger stormwater pipes. That's just a path dependency. I went up to Carpety the other day and saw a house being built on screw piles, which is radically different, and you don't need to terraform anything. It comes down to a mix of regulatory lock-in, but people genuinely just not knowing that there are alternative ways of thinking. Once big bureaucracies seize on solutions, they mainstream them. And so there's a lot of path dependency built into what we do. So, I mean, my simple answer to the person who asked the question is, I mean, we've really got to get people engaged with the fact that you can do stuff differently. And then we've got to convince the regulators that maybe they're actually locking in the past, not enabling the future.
Yes, indeed, Simon. I can see Jack and Sophie nodding vigorously. I'm appreciating that time is against us. But Sophie, there's several questions for you here. One is about mental health, and another is about local participation. How do we encourage participation at multiple levels? And maybe you could just quickly comment on the critical role of a participatory democracy, where we have active citizenship. And what we can learn from the experiences that you've had in trying to mobilize people to be engaged.
Yeah, just to quickly shout out that the local government elections are in 2 days. So if you haven't yet voted, that's an extremely important way to play a role in local democracy, and also to vote keep for the Māori wards. That is part of also this local government election. In terms of the question around active citizenship, I think, again, like to Simon's point, there's so much amazing kind of innovation and cross-pollination of ideas happening at a local level. So I think it's very much about, when it feels like all hope is lost within the system, it's kind of building the systems that we want to be living in and around locally. And there are so many ways to do that, even without a whole bunch of resource. And that's one of the things that, through my organising and the likes of School Strike for Climate and things, have found, is that with just a few $1,000s, it's actually amazing, with a bit of willpower and the right people in a conversation, what you can collectively achieve. And so I would say, just have conversations with like-minded folk in your area, and think about how culture change influences the legislative and kind of institutional environment that we exist within. We always told ourselves in the School Strike for Climate days, if 5.5 million people showed up on the steps of Parliament, they would be forced to change, because we're the ones who give them the mandate and give them their jobs. And so I think about just getting organised and collectivizing our voice and our impact. And there's so much power in that, even if it's just like initially a few friends having a yarn over dinner. It's amazing that in itself can be a form of real active citizenship and change making.
Indeed. Oh, well, thank you, Sophie. I'm going to wrap up now as we're just about out of time. I will give you, Jack, just a moment to respond to anything you want to say, but just to really congratulate the audience. We've had over 200 people online with dozens and dozens of comments and questions highlighting a really significant amount of engagement in the topics we've covered. I appreciate we've only just sort of scratched the surface. There's a need for obviously more intensive discussions in this space, covering a wide range of perspectives, disciplines, outlooks, and so on, not least Indigenous perspectives, as Simon mentioned earlier. Certainly the Helen Clark Foundation will be seeking to provide opportunities for further thoughtful discussion here. Jack, thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Sophie, for helping to make Jack's visit possible through the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and also to the contributions of the Helen Clark Foundation. Jack, do you want to just sum up in any way that you might wish?
Only to there are a few reflections in the chat that I think are really important. This is a movement. It has to be a movement of various voices to corral around this agenda. Don't leave it up to politics and to politicians alone. It requires urgency. If the Welsh Women's Peace Petition teaches you anything, it's the fact that civic society has a powerful role to play. And then to end with a mantra that we use on St. David's Day, which is our national day in Wales. We say, do the small things. And St. David also said a few other things. He said, gwnewch y pethau bychain, cadwch y ffydd, a byddwch lawen. We don't use the full quote normally, but I think it's important for this kind of discussion today. Do the small things, keep the hope, and do it with joy. So I leave you with those three prompts from Wales to Wellington, but to further afield as well.
Well, thank you very much, Jack. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Sophie. I'll turn now to Murray.
Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you, Jacob, Sophie, and Simon for, I think, an especially compelling and energizing discussion today. For me, this conversation has really enforced the value and really the necessity of viewing New Zealand's long-term policy challenges through the lens of future generations. And some trenchant comment from Simon and others about institutional durability are a very important reminder of the practical challenges, I think, of integrating future generations' perspectives into our political system when those generations can't yet vote. And to say nothing of the fact that our system of government has typically prioritized the short term, a tendency that, if anything, is probably getting stronger in the 2020s. Obviously, if the interests of future generations are to be understood and advocated for in our systems, we will need empowered and durable institutions to do that. And Jacob, your quote from Jean-Claude Juncker at the start of the session was an excellent. I hadn't heard that before. I think we'll be reflecting on it at the foundation. It was an excellent one to kick off the idea that politicians know what needs to be done. They just don't know how to get re-elected once they've done it. And I think that links really nicely to Sophie's comment about getting the politics we think we deserve. So thank you all for sharing your expertise, enthusiasm, and I think optimism with us today. Thank you to our viewers today, everyone who's joined for the session, and in particular, thank you to our members for helping to support us to host sessions like this. Ngā mihi nui, and see you all again soon.